Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we are going to completely change the way you look at something as simple as a blade of grass or a towering oak tree. We usually think of plants as these static, quiet things, right? Just sort of sitting there in the dirt. But beneath that green exterior, plants are actually highly engineered, bustling metropolises hidden right in plain sight. We're talking about complex cities with dedicated construction crews, plumbing systems, defensive walls, and massive storage warehouses, all working together in absolutely perfect harmony. To really get our heads around this, let's think about a couple of everyday things you've probably noticed. Have you ever wondered why a guava has that very distinct kind of granular crunch when you bite into it? Or how about why the branches of a tree can whip and bend wildly in a massive storm, but they don't just snap in half? Well, the answers here aren't magic. They actually come down to highly specialized tissues that act as the plant's invisible internal infrastructure.
To understand exactly how this works, we're going to map out our plant city. We'll be making 4 main stops today. First, the meristems, our construction crew. Second, the ground tissue, the scaffolding and warehouses. Third, the vascular tissue, the plumbing system. And finally, the epidermis, the city walls. Let's jump right in.
Stop number 1. Meristems, the construction crew. In any plant, the building phase is entirely handled by meristematic tissue. These are dynamic, living workers responsible for continuous lifelong growth. And what's cool is this crew is split into 3 highly specialized task forces, depending on where they're working. At the very top of the plant and deep down at the root tips, you've got the apical meristems. They build upwards and downwards, increasing the plant's height. Then, running down the sides, just beneath the bark, are the lateral meristems, which build outward to make the trunk thicker. And right in the middle, around the base of the leaves, you have the intercalary meristems, which grow the leaves and actually lengthen the stems. What's really fascinating here is the biology of these specific worker cells. Meristematic cells are these thin-walled living cells that just divide continuously. Because they're working so incredibly hard at building the plant, they have a really dense cytoplasm and a prominent nucleus. But here's the catch. They lack a vacuole. Why? Well, vacuoles are mainly for storing food, and these construction workers are moving so fast, they literally don't have the time or the need to store anything. They are all action.
Which brings us to a pretty interesting real-world scenario. What actually happens to this super-focused construction crew if the top of a plant is suddenly, say, snipped off by some gardening shears or maybe eaten by a hungry deer?
This perfectly illustrates just how localized plant growth really is. If you compare a perfectly intact shoot tip to one that's been cut, the difference is huge. Because the apical meristem, that specific crew in charge of vertical growth, was located exactly at the tip, removing it completely halts upward growth in that area. The plant won't get any taller from that specific cut point simply because the localized construction crew is just gone.
All right, moving on to stop number 2, ground tissue, the scaffolding and warehouses.
So, once the city's basic framework is built, it needs bulk, it needs support, and it needs storage. Enter ground tissue. There are 3 main types here, and you can basically think of them as the city's warehouses, its flexible scaffolding, and its rigid armor. First up is parenchyma, loosely packed, living cells with thin walls that act as warehouses to store nutrients and water. Next is parenchyma, living elongated cells with kind of irregularly thickened corners. This is your flexible scaffolding. It provides structural support but can still bend. And finally, sclerenchyma, closely packed, thick-walled cells that are actually dead at maturity. They provide the city's ultimate hard, stiff strength. Now you might be wondering how that third type, the sclerenchyma, gets so incredibly tough. It all comes down to a substance called lignin. Lignin is this complex waterproof polymer that coats the cell walls. It acts exactly like a hardcore structural cement. And honestly, it's the very reason these cells die when they mature. They end up entirely encased in this rigid, impenetrable armor.
Let's tie these heavy biology terms directly back to your everyday life. Remembering those questions from the very beginning? When you chew a crunchy guava, that granular texture, that is literally sclerenchyma tissue, specifically these things called stone cells or sclerides. When you're struggling to rip the tough husk off a coconut, you're fighting closely packed sclerenchyma fibers. Snapping a carrot in half for a snack, you are eating the food-storing warehouses, the parenchyma. And when you watch a tree's branches bending in high winds without snapping, you are watching parenchyma tissue doing its flexible job flawlessly.
And the engineering here adapts so brilliantly to different environments. Take aquatic plants, like the water hyacinth floating on a pond. How on earth do they do it? Well, they use a highly specialized version of our warehouse tissue, the parenchyma, called aerenchyma. Instead of just storing food, Erenchima features these massive internal air cavities, essentially creating microscopic life rafts that give the entire plant buoyancy. It's genius.
Which brings us to stop number 3, vascular tissue, the plumbing system. Because obviously, every great metropolis needs a reliable way to move resources around, right? The plant's plumbing is divided into 2 very distinct networks. The first one is the xylem. This is a complex tissue whose main job is to act as a one-way street, transporting water and dissolved minerals strictly upward, starting from the roots deep in the soil all the way up to the very highest leaves.
The second plumbing network is the phloem. So while the xylem handles the water, the phloem handles the food. It takes the sugars that get manufactured by the leaves during photosynthesis and transports them bidirectionally. That means it can move food up, down, and literally all around the plant, delivering energy to wherever it's needed to grow or survive.
When you put these 2 systems side by side, the contrast is pretty stark. Xylem is your upward water pipe, made of mostly dead elements, relying on the rigid hollow tubes of tracheids and vessels to just move water through bulk flow. Phloem, on the other hand, is your multi-directional food delivery network, and because it has to actively manage the transport of those nutrients, it's made up of mostly living elements, like sieve tubes and companion cells. Together, these 2 bundle up into long strands called vascular bundles. Now, if we take a microscopic look at these pipes, you can see the specialized water-conducting tracheids and vessels. But look closely at the third component, the xylem parenchyma. Nature is so clever. Even in a mostly dead water pipe system, the plant engineered some living warehouse cells right into the pipes themselves to store food materials, tannins, and to help conduct water sideways out into the other branches.
And here's a really cool fun fact about how nature exploits the specific plumbing layout. In leaves, these vascular bundles are arranged with the water-carrying xylem on the top and the food-carrying phloem on the bottom. So if you ever spot a colony of aphids feasting on a plant, you'll notice they almost always hang out on the undersides of the leaves. They've actually figured out that the bottom surface is the fastest route to tap directly into that sugar-rich phloem for a free meal. Pretty smart, right?
Finally, our last stop, epidermis, the city walls. To protect the construction crews, the scaffolding, and all that intricate plumbing, our plant city desperately needs a solid defense mechanism. And the defensive capabilities of the epidermis are just incredible. We're talking about a single layer of tightly, compactly arranged cells with absolutely zero intercellular space. This creates a seamless armor that prevents water loss and protects against both mechanical injury and invasion by parasitic fungi. Plus, to add an extra layer of defense, these cells often secrete a waxy, water-resistant outer layer called cutin. If you happen to be a desert plant, this thick layer of cutin is literally the only thing keeping your city from completely drying out in the scorching sun.
But of course, a city wall can't be entirely sealed off forever. It needs gates for trade and air. Scattered across the surface of the epidermis, we find the stomata. These are tiny pores enclosed by 2 kidney-shaped guard cells. And these guard cells literally act as security gates, swelling up to open the pore or shrinking to close it right off. This highly precise control allows the plant city to exchange vital gases for photosynthesis and manage transpiration, which is the controlled loss of water vapor.
What we've just explored today is basically a masterclass in the biological division of labor. Just like in a human city where you have totally distinct professions, your plumbers, your builders, your security guards, multicellular organisms group trillions of individual cells into specialized tissues. The meristems build, the ground tissue supports, the vascular tissue supplies, and the epidermis protects. Together, they function as a single, flawless living unit.
So the next time you take a big bite of a crunchy piece of fruit or you're watching a tree gracefully bend in the wind, take a second to really appreciate the magnificent hidden architecture that makes all of it possible. Ask yourself, what invisible plant engineering is working right in front of you? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I really hope you leave today with a newfound sense of wonder for the absolutely incredible natural world hidden right in your own backyard. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.